our next presenter doesn't really need any introduction. We have been working with her for years. She used to be with HSUS, and she's been with ASPCA about a year and a half. And she always makes herself available. She's our legislative go-to person. And Nancy Perry, and she's going to introduce and give you a little background about Carolyn Schnurr that will be presenting with her.
Thank you so much, Vicki. It is such a delight and an honor, and it always just feels so good to my soul to be in a room with compatriots like this and to have an opportunity to put our heads together and our hearts together, share our experiences, share our information, and strategize and plot a little bit as well, which I think we'll do a little bit of all of that here. And I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleague and good friend, Carolyn Schnurr, who has been working between HSUS and the ASPCA for a couple of years now at the national level on equine issues. And before that, she was in law school and volunteered for 2 summers at a wild horse sanctuary, and also worked to ensure that a horse abuser was penalized in Maine. So she has both the intellectual and the personal connection to our issues. So it's wonderful to have her working on our legislative work. She's our federal legislative manager, so she's our equine go-to person for all of the lobbying work. So thank you, Carolyn, for joining us today. So what we thought we'd do, we were asked to speak to you a little bit about the poll that the ASPCA commissioned Lake Research to do earlier this year. And it was a really exciting project because we learned some really fun, good, supportive, affirming things out of that poll. So we'll talk about it in a little more detail with you and then share a couple takeaway thoughts. And I'll hand the mic to Carolyn and let her start us off.
Thank you, Nancy. Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I've met many of you before, but there's a lot of people I haven't met yet. So it's really great to be here. Thank you so much for having us. I am going to start just by giving some background information on the poll we conducted this year that, as many of you know, the results were absolutely phenomenal beyond our wildest dreams, and so we're really happy to share that with you all today. Just some background about the mechanics of the poll. A lot of people are wanting, it's really important to be able to share who conducted this poll, first of all. The ASPCA hired Lake Research Partners, a third-party independent polling agency, to conduct the poll. So they had professional pollsters conducting a telephone survey of 1,800 registered voters across the country, and the registered voters that they surveyed, they did their best to have it even over the different geographic areas across the U.S. to get a very professional, even poll representing the national population. And the calls were made between January 9th and 12th, 2012. So this was not ASPCA government relations interns calling people, asking them if they oppose horse slaughter. This is an independent organization that does candidate polling and polling on every single kind of issue you can imagine for professional purposes. So this is as unbiased can get, and we really think it's important that everyone is aware of that as we talk about the results of the poll. Some of the key takeaways from the poll. First of all, voters oppose the slaughter of horses for human consumption. That was the number that we found out was 80%, and I'll show you a graphic of that momentarily. But it's clearer than day, clear as day that is what people feel in their heart of hearts. They do not like the idea of horses being slaughtered for human consumption. That's really encouraging. They also did a separate question on the American Horse Slaughter Prevention Act and found that support was very strong on that as well. And the other really interesting piece of this consideration is they asked the question, are you opposed to horse slaughter for human consumption? They ask it at the beginning of the poll, and then they go through the poll and ask several different questions, present different messaging points against horse slaughter, present different messaging points that are often used to try and get people to agree with horse slaughter, get give their opinions on all the different messaging points throughout the poll, and then at the end of the poll, they ask again, now you've heard all these different questions, you've heard all these different messaging points, how do you feel about horse slaughter now? And there was virtually no movement on the position from the beginning to the end. And that's really awesome to hear that people truly are committed to this opinion that horses should not be slaughtered for human consumption. And then finally, another important point that was taken away was that voters just simply, if it's the idea of horse slaughter being in existence in the U.S., whether it's U.S. owned, foreign owned, they just don't want it. Even if it is U.S. owned in regulations and everything, they're just like, no, we don't want it at all. We don't want our horses being slaughtered. So these are some very important takeaways from the poll that we are excited to hear. And here's the wonderful graphic that 80% of those registered voters are opposed to horse slaughter for human consumption. And the darker graphics are the intensity ratings. So 67% said they strongly oppose. They're not just opposed, they feel very, very passionately that way that our horses should not be slaughtered for human consumption. And to give an idea, when we talked to the pollsters after the fact, they say that a positive turnout of the poll is if you're what you're kind of looking for. It has a rating of 60% or above, and intensity rating is 40% or above. That's a really good number for you. Ours, obviously, 60%, we're at 80%, 40%, we're at 67%. So that's really, really positive to show the framing of how Americans feel on this issue. And now Nancy's going to talk a little bit more about some of the other elements.
Okay, great. So one of the things we wanted to do today is share with you a couple. We wanted to peek a little behind the scenes of what we released publicly, because when you have a poll, it's a big long document. There's a lot of detail in it. We did not release the entire poll because we wanted opponents of horse slaughter to gain the most benefit from that research. So if we released it, we would just be giving that away to our opposition. We did not want to do that. However, we thought this would be a good environment to mention some of the tidbits that we found out behind the scenes. But I would just ask that we not Facebook this or tweet this out, or just keep it for your use and only for the use of advocates that are clearly known to be on our side on this issue. Not that there's anything, the poll was so good, there's really not much help for our opposition, thankfully. But I'm just mentioning these are some of the non-public results. And I wanted you all to know that we're still actually way behind the ball when it comes to making sure that the general public is even aware that horses are slaughtered legally. They don't know. So when you look at these numbers, and the question that was asked is, as far as you know in the United States, is it legal or is it against the law to transport American horses to slaughter for human consumption in other countries, or don't you know? So it was asked very openly, comfortably, like, do you know, is it legal, is it not? So 12% thought it was legal, 35% thought it was against the law, and 53% really had no idea. So that really makes the point that our mission needs to be a lot about education, and that's actually not a bad thing, but we are in the beginning phases of the education campaign on this issue. So as frustrated as many of us are that we haven't completed our work and gotten a ban through, this tells us that we have a lot more low-hanging fruit to gather and to harness that and then to use that in our networks and to grow our movement before we're able to actually get a ban done. Did you have a question?
Was this before or after we lost the defunding language?
This was after. It was in January of this year.
So it was illegal?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and frankly, we didn't ask if slaughter in the U.S. or outside of the U.S. was legal. It was just whether or not American horses could go to slaughter. So it'd be legal kind of regardless. So, yeah. Let's break down a couple more pieces from inside the poll. As I mentioned, the opposition is strong, but not just among those who don't know much about horses and they're just kind of outside the loop. The horse community itself was very strong in their opposition. It doesn't really matter. The poll broke down partisan, gender, regional lines. It really doesn't matter. this issue crosses all those boundaries in such high numbers that even though you see some peaks and some valleys, they're way up here. So it just doesn't matter. And that's very reassuring to us, because that means every community that you live in, you can expect strong support regardless. So the region didn't really make a difference. People who self-identified in rural communities were very strongly in opposition to horse slaughter. So don't let anyone tell you, oh, this is just an urban issue for people who are out of touch. It is clearly not. So, and then as I mentioned, rural and urban voters, just very strong in this. So these are, again, very good. They should give us great confidence in going out and networking on this issue. Carolyn, did you want to cover takeaways?
Yeah. So one of the other things, as I mentioned before, that this poll covered was different types of messaging on the issue of horse slaughter. It found that messaging in opposition to horse slaughter, regardless of the type of messaging, whether it was toxicity or cruelty or companion animal ideas, all the messaging was received very positively. There were some elements that were more positively, everything's positive, more positively received than others. And so we looked at that and the idea of framing the issues around the most positive or most intensely received messages, putting those at the forefront and then building on them. We looked at those elements. And the two planks that were of anti-horse slaughter messaging that were most well received, that resonated the most sincerely, had two elements: horse welfare and human welfare, which makes sense because this survey was not just of people who are horse advocates that are in this room. It was everyone. So it was people who have had experiences with horses. It was people who have never had experiences with horses. It was horse-focused people. It was people-focused people. So the notion, the way to frame the issue has to be in two separate, looking at it in two different ways, which I think this movement is really doing a great job with, looking at the toxicity issue as an up-and-coming and very important element of the message. The other thing that came through very strongly is that the opposition's messages, all the varying kinds they use, were not persuasive. We trotted out all kinds of, all their different talks about old horses and, economy and everything you could think of, and people just weren't buying it. They were just like, no, you're not persuading me of anything. And that really came to show when, as I said earlier, at the end of the poll, we asked the question again, how do you feel about horse slaughter? And even after hearing opposition messages, they still felt the same. They don't like it. The bottom line, as Nancy mentioned with the previous slide, is that we don't have to persuade anybody at this point. We just need them to be aware. As we saw earlier, 80% are opposed to horse slaughter. However, as 88% either think it's illegal or didn't know it was a problem. So that's a big issue. It's on our side. We just need to make sure everyone is aware that it is an issue in the first place, and we'll get a lot farther. So this message triangle looks at the three strongest messages that resonated with voters, and one of the strongest issues was this toxicity issue that we've been discussing. The whole idea that it's toxic to humans, we shouldn't eat it for that reason. We should not allow all these drugs that are in them. They should not allow that to be into the food chain. That resonated with a lot of people. So we need to make sure we continue to incorporate that into our messaging, which I think everyone is doing a great job of doing. The next most persuasive argument, and again, when I say most persuasive next, these are like half a percentage point apart. So these are just the three that stood out. Don't downplay cruelty and just only talk about these. All need to be in tandem, hence the triangle aspect. Horses are like our pets. Talking about the companion animal aspect of horses really resonated with people as well. We wouldn't treat our dogs and our cats this way. Even if they were ill, we wouldn't send them to slaughter and eat them. That sounds weird. So why do we think that that's okay to do for our companion animal, our horses? That's just a bizarre concept and didn't resonate with anyone. And then finally, the cruelty aspect. Obviously, the transportation, the way slaughter is done, the biology of the horses, it's absolutely just impossible to slaughter them in any way that is not cruel. That really resonated as well. So those three elements, and used together, really make a positive, persuasive argument. And so we kind of broke it down in a way that looks at how to build on those pieces bit by bit, and talk about why we should ban horse slaughter for human consumption. First of all, horses aren't raised for meat, and there's important reasons for that. Their meat is toxic to humans, so everyone needs to be aware of that. And also, in addition to the issue with the human concerns and the human health issues, is the fact that it's cruel. Whether it's bad, it's bad for humans, it's also bad for horses, and so we should not slaughter them and subject them to a process that is inherently cruel and cannot be done in any other way. And then finally, building on those elements, are the toxicity issue, the fact that we should not treat them this way because of our relationship and that it's cruel. Ultimately, they need to also ban this, not just because the slaughter process is cruel, but the transportation element is cruel as well, which we all know all too well. And so building on each of those elements ultimately is kind of framing the argument in a linear way to ultimately say, this is why Congress must pass a ban on horse slaughter. So that's kind of a visual way to look at our results from the poll and the different messaging elements, and how they really resonate to build a really persuasive argument for this issue. So I think Nancy's going to talk about taking that and moving into what we've been saying in Congress today.
And just to reiterate, we know you all already know all of this messaging. It's completely intuitive for you. All these arguments, all the knowledge that you have, none of this is necessarily new information, but it was fascinating for us to see which pieces emphasize sort of hit Pater better than others, and how to construct them and how to blend them. So we've been trying, before this, I think I was often talking about the majestic nature of horses and the role they played in settling our country, and those things are good. Those are important points to make. I mean, they're all true. We have a special relationship with horses. But I was surprised to see it really wasn't the most effective argument. Again, among many good arguments, it's still a good argument, but it wasn't at the top. And so it's kind of made me rethink how we want to frame things, which piece to put forward. If you only have 5 seconds, which one do you choose? Obviously, your audience is going to vary, so when you're speaking, writing, you want to always think about who your audience is and tailor whatever you're saying to them. So these aren't hard and fast pieces of information for you, but they certainly informed the way we were thinking about our materials, so we thought it might be useful. So, okay, turning to what's going on in the way we apply these and sort of what the current status is on a lot of things. Obviously, we've all been engaged in working on the American Horse Slaughter Prevention Act. We've all been frustrated, we've all been depressed, we've all been angered by the fact that this obviously supported piece of legislation has not made its way through the congressional process. I'm sure you all have noticed, though, that not much has. We're dealing with a set of circumstances that we're not able to control entirely. We have a really divided country, a lot of partisan politics that are flaming in Congress. And just to put it in perspective, the New York Times ran a piece a couple days ago, you may have seen, about this Congress. And it really reminded me of how little they've done. Because this Congress, so far, after 6,000 plus bills have been introduced, has passed 173 new laws. To put that into context, the Congress that Harry Truman dubbed the Do-Nothing Congress passed 960 laws. So we're that much worse off than that. We're the do less than nothing Congress. Okay, so it's not us, it's not our fault, it's not that we haven't done a good job pushing, pressing. I wouldn't say there aren't more things we could have done, I wouldn't say we've been flawless, but I would say that we have to kind of realize that we work with the circumstances we've been given. We have to find a way to get around those circumstances sometimes. I don't believe for a minute we should stop working on the congressional angle, because sometimes you can't even see the progress that you're making because you're reaching out to new minds, and some of them, believe it or not, most of them have heard about it, but some still aren't educated on this issue, so sometimes that very first step in Congress still needs to be done. But we are 165 co-sponsors in the House, 26 in the Senate. We need to up those numbers still. For this year, given that Congress just left town yesterday and they're not coming back until the election, and I think they're going to wait and see what happens with the election, the forecast would appear to say, and no one really knows, so it's just whatever, pie in the sky, but it looks a lot like the House is going to stay with the same leadership, but the Democrats will probably gain some seats. The Senate is so tight, so close, that it is possible the Republicans could gain control of the Senate, but it isn't looking likely based on current polls and current races if you look around the country. So that's just, back of the napkin kind of thoughts. So if there's no striking changes, I would guess they're going to stay in the same lazy mode, not really come back for a big lame duck session, not pass the appropriations bills, they'll just continue them to next year, which is bad news on horse slaughter, good news on horse soaring. I don't know what that news is with regard to wild horses, probably zero. So that's probably what will happen. But they could come back. There is the possibility that they would come back and do a lot of work in December in a lame duck session. We did do, I think, a good job of really fighting for defunding this year. It's an uphill battle since the leadership changed. In ag appropriations, we don't have the kind of high-level support, the top-level folks working behind the scenes for us to make sure that our defunding language gets in there. So we have to come from behind. It's not put into the bills up front, we have to put it in. And this year we had a nail-biter of a vote in committee. Many of you know, you're nodding, Julie and others, you know that it was nip and tuck, and I'm not sure I've ever seen a closer committee vote. We sat in that room and we really did not know what was going to happen. But we managed to win on a voice vote in committee. And I think, frankly, it was due to the crazy, intense, great grassroots work that happened. There were some fence sitters, neutral folks, and even some who voted the other way on it in the past, who came our way this time in the voice vote. We watched them say aye. So it wasn't a recorded vote. We don't have confirmation of that in a recorded vote, but we were in the room and saw them say it. So we know that we won 2 to 3 votes we wouldn't normally have had in the past, and that's inching forward, even though it didn't get us there. These are signs of progress. And I look for those little signs of progress, because in a world where very little moves, you have to look at the inches. So that one most likely will continue us into the next year. Whether they'll take up that bill right away when they come back and work on it and get it done in its own right, or just continue it for the whole year, is still very debatable. So we may have to fight back and battle these ground skirmishes in the various states wherever applications go in on horse slaughter plants for a while yet. So we need to be strong and keep working on field development, doing exactly what y'all have been doing, because it's been working. So that's the federal legislation. On the regulatory front, I am so excited about the FDA and USDA petitions that Front Range and HSUS worked up and that you heard Bruce talk about earlier today. That is on point. If you probably read the petitions, it's solid, really good stuff. And the NEPA letter that they submitted using the National Environmental Policy Act that Bruce was talking about is so strong, and it's so good, and it really, I believe, has gotten through to the agencies, and they recognize they have to go through a lot of process before they grant any applications. So that's heartening to me. There have been no headlines, they haven't announced any decisions to grant these things, but just watching the process, we're winning. On that front, we're winning, because they're not granting any applications. So that's very heartening, and I am interested to see where that will go. I believe it could be the thing that wipes it away. When it comes to anyone thinking they can't make a difference on this issue, many of you know Declan Gregg. Let's talk about Declan. So this is a testament to outreach and advocacy and the importance of it. And many of you may know his story, but he was a 9-year-old when he started his work last November. His mom, Stacy Gregg, was reading someone's website, probably one of you, about horse slaughter and learning about it. And she was really upset. It was the first time she heard about it. She is a staunch Republican from the state of New Hampshire. Very religious, just very law and order kind of person. She was reading this and she was outraged. And she was so upset that Declan asked her what she was reading. And she said, "Oh honey, I can't tell you about this." And then she thought, well, if I want my kids to change the world, I can't shield them from these realities. And he persisted. And so finally she did tell him what was going on, and in terms she thought he could understand it. And he immediately said, well, that's just not right. I'm not going to stand for that, and I'm going to do something about it. And she thought, wow, this will be a great opportunity to teach him about the civic process. And so she took him seriously. And little Declan Gregg started a blog for kids for horses, and he started soliciting letters from kids all over the country, asking them to write in to support a ban. And Equine Welfare Alliance set up an opportunity for Declan to come to Capitol Hill and deliver the many letters that he had accumulated. And that propelled him into the office of his representative, Representative Frank Ginta, who was not a co-sponsor. And Declan lobbied him, and lobbied him hard, and kept lobbying him, and didn't let go. And when he went back home, he stayed in touch and called every week. And I guess it was around the time that the Horses on the Hill event happened, where Declan was speaking. Mr. Ginta knew Declan was coming back to town, and so he called Declan and said, "I just want you to know I'm going to co-sponsor the bill." Like, geez, no more visits. So, persistence counts. Every voice counts. Kids have a really important and unique role to play in this effort. It's their future, and they sometimes speak with a clarity that us jaded old folks can't. So we welcome people like Declan, and he is a real leader. Here he is speaking with Senator Landrieu to his left, and Senator Scott Brown, and Mr. Moran is in the back there. John Corbett, a movie star there. He's making major waves. So I just wanted to share that. Many of you know his story, but it's good for us to see these positive things happening. And remember that when you think we can't make a difference, I want you to think about Declan. So. I just want to mention on the state level, many of you were intimately involved when we learned about communities considering opening a horse slaughter plant this last year. Many of you know the story better than I do, but we're thrilled that in every case, local voices and local strength and smart, creative, strategic thinking won the day. In New Mexico, looking into the background of the folks who were proposing this. I know Front Range was directly involved in that. I bet many of you were involved in that. It's really paid off, and at this point, it looks like that project's probably dead. In Missouri, there have been 2 different communities now. In one place, the town people ran out with a pitchfork down the road, and then in is it Rockville? Somebody did some good research and found out that actually the applicant doesn't actually own the land and the property that they're supposed to own for this application, and it's just gotten minor. So sometimes you win by figuring out where the rules are being broken, and you don't win because everyone doesn't want horse slaughter, and that's just fine. In Oregon, in the town of Hermiston, Dave Duquette from United Horsemen's hometown. So shout out to you, Dave. So not so much good luck happening for him up there. The mayor came out saying horse slaughter stinks in May, and then just 2 weeks ago, the city manager came out officially saying it would be detrimental to have a horse slaughter plant in their community. So even in his own hometown, I mean, we are winning. We haven't won, we are winning. That is the take home from all of these individual events. And then in Texas, there was a stink in the air that maybe the legislators would start looking at bringing horse slaughter back by amending their law. And Paula and Julie and all the truly amazing hardcore advocates in the state of Texas got together and made sure that they knew what kind of a battle they'd be in for. We don't know yet if they're going to take it up. We have to be completely vigilant and ready. Oh, right, thank you. And the Texas Humane Legislative Network is a strong, vital, amazing voice in that state, and I know that they are #1 going to fight to ensure that that doesn't happen. Carolyn just reminded me in New Mexico, not only did it fall apart at the local level, but the local group there, is anyone here from APNM, Animal Protection New Mexico, Lisa Jennings group? Amazing work. They immediately contacted their folks. They had already built-in networks with the Lands Commissioner and with the Attorney General and with the Governor, different parties, Democrats, Republicans, and got them all within 3 days to come out and say publicly they didn't want horse slaughter. Horse slaughter is cruel, we don't want it in our state. That's from having pre-existing strength and being ready on the ground to mobilize. So that's a big shout out to APNM. I mean, this takes a village, this work we're doing, and we cannot afford to divide because we're just handing Sue Wallace a big package every time we fight with each other, and so I'm not going to do that. And I'm glad you guys aren't either. It's critical. So those are the community organizing examples that should give us strength. And then in New Jersey, of course, we all got the good news yesterday. Governor Christie came through and signed that law, and we have a very strong ban in New Jersey. And you may know this already, but that bill's better than we talked about in some ways. We didn't want to say too much, but I mean, it bans not just horse slaughter in the state, but it bans you moving horses through the state to go to slaughter. Transport. And New Jersey is kind of an artery, you may have noticed, if you've ever been on the Jersey Turnpike. So that's kind of a nice development. And I will say it was a little touch and go. We were talking with the governor's office quite a bit, almost daily, and getting the sense that the Farm Bureau and the Ag Department were making headway with them. And they were thinking about a conditional veto. We couldn't say this a lot, but some of you probably knew it. They were thinking about stripping out that transport piece. And so we gave them a legal memo explaining why that would be a problem. We talked to them as much as we could. We lobbied them. We did alerts. Many of you wrote in, you called in, you pressured them. And being the celebrity culture that we are, it turns out that some of the real headlines started popping up when we got some equine ambassadors that work with the ASPCA to do a joint letter. A lot of high-level equestrian folks live in Jersey, and they wrote a really strong letter indicating that not only was the ban important, but the transport provision was important. And one of those people was Jessica Springsteen, who's a really top hunter-jumper rider. And there's Jessica. She was delighted to do it. And as you may know, weird perfect storm situation. The governor is enamored with her father, Bruce Springsteen. Wishes he could be buddies, but Bruce has not been very welcoming. So when Jessica signed the letter, the press thought, that's kind of an interesting little storyline. We can play that up. Sometimes we have to use the resources we have and figure out how to feed the media the right kind of stories that they can use, because they don't just report on the stories that we think they should. They need something juicy in there usually. The state of the media kind of requires us to figure that out and give them something creative when we can. And this one kind of fell into place. And so we really saw some great press out of it. They indicated they got thousands and thousands of calls and letters. So that's not just Jessica signing the letter. She may have been the tipping point, but y'all primed that really well. So congratulations on that. That's a really big one. And then finally, we just wanted to mention that a lot of the work that you all are doing in terms of reaching out to the equine community, supporting our rescue network, doing the rescue work that you do, this stuff is critically important. It's hard, it's difficult, it's hard to always get everything we need to get. We can't save them all, but doing that work and showing our strength in that area is really important. One thing that is really fun about coming to the ASPCA is that the organization has a history of offering the McClay Medal to hunter jumpers. Yeah, so Victoria knows all about that. I grew up riding hunter jumpers too, and to me it was just like another really awesome medal if you could win the McClay Medal. You know, you were a really good rider, so it was a real great feather in your cap, but I didn't know why the ASPCA's name was on it. And so what happened was in 1933, one of our board members, Fred McClay, felt like it would be really good to sponsor a medal class for riders that would institute a sense of responsible horsemanship and compassion for horses. And And so that was his message when he sponsored the original medal. And by the time I was riding in the 80s, that was lost. It was just a competitive thing. It was a great thing if you could win it. It's a really hard class to win. And so in recent years, about a decade ago, the ASPCA realized we've got to go back and talk to those riders about what that medal actually means. And so we've been slowly doing that, going around the circuit and talking to the riders. We will be in November at the National Horse Show where the finals are. This is a class where you have to win it locally, and then you have to win it regionally, and then about 200, 250 riders will show up at the Kentucky Horse Park in November and compete all over again to be the top rider in the nation. So we will have a chance to talk to all of them and explain to them that now they have to earn that title and be a part of that wonderful history of being responsible horse owners and compassionate horse owners. And we talk to them about horse slaughter, and we talk to them about horse soaring. We talk to them about a lot of the current issues of the day and ask them to help us out. And that's exactly how we ended up gathering the equine ambassadors that we work with, including Jessica Springsteen. It's only one part of the horse community, and it's kind of an elite English riding part of the horse community, but it's an important part. And I would like to see a lot more outreach going on to the entire showing community and the entire horse industry, because even though some of those industry leads say that, oh, we're okay with it, you know, unfortunately it's a necessary evil, really most of the folks in the industry are on our side. So I think that being out there and networking with those communities, we're going to find those people and bring them into this work. And then as we mentioned before, we had this Horses on the Hill event, I think it was in April, where Declan came, and a lot of other voices came, including some of the same rescue groups that have come and spoken to the equestrian community at the show. So then they translated that to coming to the Hill and speaking out and urging for a passage of the ban. So these are the kinds of intermingling and integration that we need to do, strengthening our network in the field, getting out there and speaking to folks, not taking for granted that people know what's going on, bringing them into and empowering them to be a part of the change. We've got to do the groundwork and the ground battles in order to win at the big level. And then the last thing I wanted to be sure to mention is our equine grants program. Last year, the ASPCA gave out $1.5 million to equine rescues. So it's important. It's the right thing for the ASPCA to be doing, and I'm very glad that we are. Those will continue. We just offered another hay bailout given the situation with hay. It's critical that we find creative strategies to continue to be a strong safety net for horses. The answer is never going to be slaughter, no matter what the challenges are. We all know that. But we do need vital, strong, viable ways to help horses that are in need, including educating the horse community, educating and stopping the overbreeding, preventing the problem to the extent we can, and then providing a safety net for those that do need it. We all know that there's a place for all those horses, and it doesn't have to be in a slaughter plant, and never should be. And we are a better society than that. And so keep that vision, and remember that we are making headway on all these levels, but challenge yourself. You know, here we are talking. This is important, and it's refreshing, and it's affirming to be together, and very inspiring. I've gotten all kinds of new thoughts today just listening to you all. But don't let it stop here. Let's all go out and start speaking locally. Even if you only get 2 people or 4 people to come, if they become active in this group, that's a critical addition. And so if you guys can go out everywhere you are, I know many of you are doing this, but let's do it more. Let's do it more. Let's build our ranks, because that will make us unstoppable. And I believe we will get there. So I just want to thank you for the work you do. It is truly heartwarming to hear the stories of what you all are doing. And the day-to-day individual horse rescues make me just as happy as these political gains, because you're making a huge difference for those individual animals as well. So thank you so much for doing that work, and we just really appreciate it.